Okay, we're in the middle of, well, it started chapter 3 of Maimonides' Laws of Tshuvah. In the handout that I gave you, we're on page 2. And now he introduces a related idea, judgment. Because Baruch Hu judges a person, judges his life. But it happens more than once. So he says, just as a person's merits and sins are weighed at the time of his death, so too the sins of every inhabitant of the world together with his merits are weighed on the festival of Rosh Hashanah. If one is found righteous, his verdict is sealed for life. If one is found wicked, his verdict is sealed for death. Beinoni, who he said was 50-50 in terms of the merits and sins, remains undecided to Yom Kippur. If he repents, he's sealed for life. If not, his verdict is sealed for death. See, there are a few things to try to understand. First of all, the Rambam is setting it up as a conflict. Even though his life is weighed up at the end of his life, also on Rosh Hashanah, as if to say, well, once you know that you're going to have a verdict of your life when you die, that should be it. That should be enough. What more does weighing it up on Rosh Hashanah add? Why is it necessary? And in particular, because it's obviously incomplete. All that can be weighed up on Rosh Hashanah is what you've done up until then. God does not use his knowledge of the future to make a judgment about how you should be treated now. So then, what's the point of it? And he describes it as a decision about what shall happen in the coming year, whether the person, on the basis of his record up until now, deserves life in the coming year or not. So this means it's a very singular judgment. It's not about other types of reward and punishment. It's not about opportunities. It's just, shall he live out the year or shall he not live out the year? So, and the judgment, since it's every year, goes on the year past. It means you look at that year past and say, does that record earn a spot in the world? Now, the world is a context, and it's developing, and it's going through various processes. So it's the question is, does he fit? Does he fit into the next year's history? Does he have a spot where he can play a productive role, and then he'll live out the year? Or, if he doesn't, then he won't live out the year. And of course, whether or not he has a spot depends upon what his capabilities are, what his strengths are. In particular, his spiritual strengths. So, based on his record of performing mitzvos or performing transgressions, that will be an indication of what his spiritual strengths are, and that is the way in which the decision is made for the year to come. The judgment that's made at the end of his life is more summing up of his whole life and his position in the world to come. Here it's just for the next year. And now I want to share with you an idea which is not very well known. These judgments aren't absolute. These judgments are not absolute. In fact, the Ramban says the following in the Shara Gmul. So imagine a person who on Rosh Hashanah is judged that he has no place in the world in the coming year, and he's going to die in the coming year. Judgment is that he's going to die. It could happen that during that year, he will perform a spectacular transgression, an absolutely enormous crime, and because he performed that crime, he will live out the year against what was decided on Rosh Hashanah. So there are two surprises in that statement. Number one, it means that the judgment of Rosh Hashanah isn't absolute. It could happen. It could turn out differently. And also, why would the trigger for achieving longer life be the commission of a great crime? How does that work? So Ramban here uses a principle that you find in the Talmud, one of the aspects of the way Kodesh Baruch Hu deals with the world is justice. And justice demands that what happens to you be determined by your actions. And in particular, if you do a good action, then you should get some kind of reward for it. There should be some good result of doing a good action. And if you do something bad, there should be some kind of bad result from it, unless, as we've been saying the whole time, you do Tshuvah, and that stops that from happening. Now he says, imagine a person whose record is so bad that he doesn't have a place in the world to come. Well, what happens to all the good actions that he performed? God's justice requires that they be rewarded. Can't just erase them. You don't use some actions to erase other actions and clear the slate and then just deal with the remainder. Each action has to be accounted for. And the way in which that takes place is that he's rewarded in this world for all the good actions that he did, so that when he dies, God doesn't owe him anything. And then, according to this position, his soul simply is, it disappears. It's just annihilated. And he doesn't go into the world to come. So now he says, imagine a person who is slated to die in the coming year, and therefore, but he's slated to die in the coming year, but he has a place in the world to come. Everyone's going to die sooner or later. Everyone will die sooner or later, and even those who you heard about, maybe were taken up to heaven alive, they're going to die also. Everyone must die. Before the Mashiach comes, everyone must die. Even if it's a half hour before the Mashiach comes, but everyone's going to die. So he's going to die in the coming year because he hasn't got any place in the further developments of the world, but he's an okay guy. He's an okay guy. And he's going to go into the world to come. Now he commits a gigantic transgression 2 weeks before Rosh Hashanah, and he's so deteriorated his record that he's not going to go in the world to come. Oh, but now that he's not going to go into the world to come, he has to be paid off for all of his good deeds in this world. And 2 weeks to Rosh Hashanah isn't enough time to pay him off for his good deeds in this world. And therefore he will live out the year in spite of the fact that on Rosh Hashanah it was decreed that he should die. Because his condition has changed so drastically that decree doesn't apply to him anymore. So this introduces you to, number one, the idea that the decree is not absolute. And also, one way in which the dynamics work, which is perhaps a little bit surprising, that person has to be paid off for his good deeds. We don't say, well, your overall record is so bad that wipes out your merit of getting paid for your good deeds. No, it's not true. The good deeds are independent actions and they have to be compensated. When you move the compensation into this world, then you may need more time to do that, more time than this year allows. You got a question?
Well, you said we're all going to die even if Mashiach comes in 30 minutes. That means we're all going to die before Mashiach gets here?
That's right.
And then everyone will be resurrected?
Well, those who have earned resurrection will be resurrected. That's right. That's right. Exactly right. The Gemara says, because after Adam committed the sin of the tree of knowledge, the verse says, from earth you were taken, and to earth you shall return. And that applies to everybody. No exceptions. The Gemara says this. It applies to everybody. Okay? Now, just let me fill out a little bit this picture that we're working with. So this fellow, originally it was thought that he was going to die in the coming year and go into the world to come and get reward for all of his good deeds in the world to come. Then he committed a tremendous crime and then lowered his status to the point where he's not going to the world to come. And then we're being told he's being paid off for his good deeds in this world. Is that fair? The Talmud says, Schar b'hai amaleka, the real reward for the good deeds that you do can't be delivered in this world. Can't be. Because that real reward is something that the soul created, and the soul's expression and experience of reward is only in the world to come, where it's not compromised by the requirement to live together with a body that needs to be directed and needs to be controlled and needs to be focused and needs to be elevated, and which drags on the soul's capabilities. So the real reward is the world to come. So you say, okay, since he's not going to the world to come, instead of paying him for his mitzvahs to the world to come, we'll pay him here. But it's not the same payment. It's not an equal payment at all. It's a gigantically reduction in the payment. Is that fair? So there are two ways to answer this question. One way is, let's see how he himself valued the good deeds that he's doing. Let's check his valuation of the good deeds. Well, let's see. It's 6:30 in the afternoon, and sunset is 6:45. He's on the telephone doing a business deal, and he hasn't davened mincha. He's not said the afternoon prayers. 15 minutes, sun's going down. Doesn't have the good fortune of being Hasidic, which would give him another hour. No, he's a good Litvish Yid. But there's $15,000 hanging on this deal. So he says, yeah, mincha, right, yeah, but $15,000. So, that's it. I'll do mincha tomorrow. I'm not doing mincha today. So he values mincha as less than $15,000. That's his valuation. He's not willing to give up $15,000 to daven mincha. So, because Baruch Hu says, so you put the value of not more than $15,000 on mincha. For every mincha you daven, I'll give you $15,000. That's your valuation. You have no complaint. I'm paying you in the amount that you yourself recognize to be equal. He's misled. He has no clue as to what the ultimate reward would have been and what he's giving up. People make decisions often in ignorance, but they make the decisions, take responsibility for them. So that's one way in which you could say that it was fair to pay him off in this world. The other way is to understand what reward is and how it relates to the experience of the world to come. A natural way to think of reward is like being paid. Being paid in dollars for the work that you do. That means at the end of the week, when a person's going to the bank to deposit money, you don't know whether you earned it as an economist, or as a plumber, or as a journalist, because money is money. All he got was dollars. That's one kind of reward. But there's another kind of reward. Let's think about the reward of doing exercise. The reward of doing exercise, you have a healthier body. And usually you have a better mind. I'm speaking as someone who does exercise regularly, so I'm not talking hypothetically. Right? Here the reward is what you build in yourself. You are in a better position than you were in before. That's the way the reward works that we're talking about. You don't get paid in dollars or in dollops of pleasure. And for this mitzvah you get $47 of pleasure. For that one you get $103 of pleasure. And the pleasure could be ice cream cones. No. There's something going on in the world to come. God is revealing himself in a certain way, making himself available in a certain way. And if you attune yourself to that, if you prepare yourself for that, then you'll be able to receive it. If you don't, then you're just not capable of integrating it. It's a little bit like you tell the person that the reward in the world to come is music. If you're appropriately sensitive, it's Beethoven. And if you come from a different background, you might prefer some other kind of music, but it's music. And one of the things you do in your lifetime is you puncture your eardrums. Well, okay, music's there, but you can't hear it. For you, it's like there being nothing there. You made yourself incapable of receiving what the world to come. Now, that means this is one of the aspects of free will. Free will has a very wide scope of what you can do and what its consequences are. And a person's free decisions can make himself incapable of receiving in the world to come. So if that's the case, then God's justice says, look, the real reward for a mitzvah is in the world to come. but he can't receive that. So I have to do something to show that he did something good and he gets a compensation for it. So I'll compensate him in this world. Those are the two ways to answer that question. And that's the principle of the Talmud, that the person gets paid in this world and then he loses that opportunity to exist in the world to come. And according to the way the various positions of life are described, this happens maybe 1,000th of 1% of the time. It's a very, very rare. A person has to be very dedicatedly evil in order to accomplish this drastic outcome. Did I speak to you about conscience money? I did. Okay. Huh? Conscious money. No. So I say things in different groups. Conscious money were like this. Let's see, a guy's a thief. Yeah, I'm stealing. It's really not right to steal. You know what? I'll give some money to charity. That'll make it okay. Because I didn't use it all for myself. Support a charity. That's called conscious money because he uses his contribution to charity to solve his conscience, so he doesn't feel bad about what he's doing. We hear that as a picture of utter corruption. He's a criminal, deliberately stealing money, and he pretends that since he's giving some money to charity, it's okay to steal. That's colossally wrong and wicked, and it's just a picture of corruption. Our tradition doesn't look at it that way. Our tradition gives a description of what it is to be evil, really evil. Sofa Rasha Latzadik, the wicked person looks at the righteous person, Umabakesh Hamito, and wants to kill him. The wicked person's attitude is, there isn't enough room in the world for me and him because he's righteous, and I can't stand righteous people. I want righteous people to die. This guy who gives conscious money can give conscious money to a tzaddik and say, listen, I gave money to a righteous person. That's definitely worthwhile, and that makes it okay to steal. He's wrong. It doesn't make it okay to steal, but he doesn't qualify for that description of wickedness. Because with that description of wickedness, he would not have given money to the righteous person. He would have wanted to kill the righteous person. So you see what our picture of wickedness is. Our picture of wickedness is thorough and consistent and deep and overwhelming, that the person should lose the world to come. So that's going to be very rare. When it happens, then you have this principle of compensating him in this world for what he's done. That's one thing. And now the second thing the Rambam says, and this the commentators work very hard on. Rosh Hashanah is the day of judgment, and if he qualifies for majority of good, he's written to the book of life. If he has a majority of bad, then he's written to the book of death. If he's 50-50, he's held over till Yom Kippur. Okay. And then what decides it is whether he does Tshuvah or not. If he does Tshuvah, then he is written in the book of life, and if he doesn't do Tshuvah, he's written in the book of death. Why is that? After all, from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur is 10 days. A lot of time there to do mitzvos. Why not take into account all the mitzvahs he does from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur? And if it's a majority of mitzvahs over transgressions, that in itself should tip the scales. Why is only Tshuvah the deciding factor? So the first part of the answer is, the judgment is on last year. What he does from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur cannot affect the judgment for last year. That's on the next year's judgment. So the mitzvahs that he does now can't count for last year. Okay. But then how does Tshuvah work? Well, if he does Tshuvah, remember, if he does Tshuvah, he's relieved of responsibility for that transgression. So you imagine here you have a balanced scale. Here are the mitzvos, here are the transgressions, and it's equal. Now he does Tshuvah for one of these. Well, when he does that one of those is taken off the scale. Now this pan is lighter, and this pan is heavier, so it goes down like this, and he gets written in the book of life. Because Tshuvah has a retroactive effect. We explained it, 2 senses are retroactive. That event in the past no longer accounts for his future, no longer plays any role in determining his future. So that changes the judgment on last year. Yeah.
When during Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, it's a time where like you ask also, it's not just asking Hashem for forgiveness, it's if you've harmed others or done anything to someone else, you ask them for forgiveness. Are you supposed to do it leading up to Rosh Hashanah, like before? Is there an ideal time? Like when you're supposed to ask someone forgiveness up to three times. If they say no, then whatever, but what's like that whole...
So there are different opinions as to what role that plays. Everyone agrees you have to do it. Everyone agrees if you don't do it, then you're not going to receive atonement for what you did. Whether it's part of the mitzvah tshuva or isn't part of the mitzvah tshuva, that's a matter of subtle disagreement. But I don't think it has to play any role in your question. Just now, what's the idea about the ideal time? The ideal time is right after the transgression. Ideal time is don't wait. Indeed, waiting can make things much more difficult. But if you don't do it at that time, then I'm going to come to speak about this in a moment. The end of the responsibility is Yom Kippur, and if Yom Kippur goes by, you get an additional penalty because you didn't do the tshuva that you had to do. So the best time to do it is immediately, but when the gravity of this season appears and people become focused on improving and wanting to lead up to Yom Kippur, now is the time, Elul, and the first days of Tishrei, that's the time when people do that. But that's more a psychological thing than a theological thing. Yeah.
On his question, and I kind of asked a similar type of question yesterday, but if you feel as though you have done a transgression against somebody and it deserves an apology or however whatever you do, and they don't feel as though you transgressed them, how do you deal with something like that? Because they won't accept your apology because they feel as though you haven't transgressed them.
I guess it's a good question. I guess there are at least two different things going on in the apology. One is to ask them to forgive you. That's where your question really applies. Because they may say, there's nothing to forgive. I don't feel that you did anything wrong to me. And the other is to acknowledge that what you did was wrong. So, for example, let me give you a brutal example. You made fun of someone in public, and you feel bad about it. You go to him and say, I'm very sorry that I did that. It was terrible to do it. And he says, I don't take you seriously. Didn't bother me at all. You're a zero. I didn't feel bad. I looked around the room and I said, he's making fun of me. Who's getting the negative feelings here? You are, not me. You didn't bother me. I'm not in pain. Not even angry at you. It was just foolish, that's all. So that's one thing. There's nothing to forgive because he doesn't hold any grudge against you. But what you did was objectively wrong anyway. And apologizing for doing something objectively wrong is also appropriate, whether he suffered from it or didn't suffer from it. So I think that part would require an apology anyway.
In this case, would you still have to try 3 times? Or... Again,
he's telling you there's nothing to forgive. In other words, he is not holding any grudge against you. So there's nothing to try.
So it is forgiven.
It's more than forgiven. It was never held against you. You only forgive someone who you judged badly. If you didn't judge you badly in the first place, so then there's no question, nothing to forgive really. But to acknowledge that you did something wrong is appropriate, because one of the purposes of appealing to the victim is for you to realize and express the depth of the mistake that you made. It's for you as well, not just for him. Okay, so now that explains why if you do tshuva, then it can help the last year's judgment because it takes off one of the transgressions from last year. But how can not doing tshuva add to your liabilities for last year? How does that work? So here there's a way of understanding some things that the Rabbi writes, which I want to share with you, to give you an illustration of how Jewish reasoning works. This person did a transgression in January. Yom Kippur is the day of Tshuvah. How do we understand the time period between January and Yom Kippur? I'll give you an example. There's a mitzvah to put on tefillin once a day, except for Shabbos and holidays. Let's say the day is from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. So, put it on tefillin takes 10 minutes. Sometime during the day, he should put on tefillin. If I say to him at 4 o'clock, listen, it's 4 p.m., the day is waning. Why don't you put on tefillin? He says, it's 4 o'clock. There's 2 hours left. Give me a break. If I come to him at 10 to 6, listen, 10 minutes. It's now or never. And he says, I know, but forget it. And he doesn't put them on. Then he has transgressed. Now, when is the transgression? To what time does the transgression apply? If I had to date the transgression, should we say the transgression was from 10 of 6 to 6 because that was his last chance? I think not. Let's define the transgression. What's the definition of transgression? It's a day without tefillin, because he could have put it on any time from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. So the time of the transgression is the whole 12 hours. It's 12 hours with no tefillin in it. All right. Now let's compare that to Tshuvah. Person performed the transgression in January. Yom Kippur is the end of the opportunity to fulfill that mitzvah of Tshuvah, which he's required to do because of the transgression in January. That's why Yom Kippur, the Rambam says, is the day of Tshuvah. It's the end period of Tshuvah. And that's why everyone's obligated to do Tshuvah in Yom Kippur. But if he fails or doesn't do Tshuvah, and you ask, when was the transgression? The transgression was the whole period of time from January to Yom Kippur. That whole 9-month period of time. Because the requirement to do it started in January. And he had any time from January all the way to the end of Yom Kippur to do it. He didn't do it. Then that whole time is empty of Tshuvah. And a lot of that time was last year, wasn't it? So that time last year without Tshuvah can weigh down the negative side and mean that the negative side is pushed out. Now, we have to be very careful when the Rambam says that Yom Kippur is the end time for Tshuvah. He says that you can do Tshuvah on your deathbed. We mentioned this. The last half hour of your life, you can do Tshuvah, and you're forgiven for everything you did. But what he means is, according to this explanation, when you commit the transgression, an obligation of Tshuvah applies to you, and there's a time period that's given to fulfill that obligation. And if you don't fulfill that obligation, then that obligation is failed, and it's another liability that you have, and a new obligation kicks in. Because now you have the transgression in January, plus the failure to do Tshuvah, and both of those need Tshuvah. So you don't lose the opportunity to do Tshuvah for your transgressions, but you gain an extra liability because of the fact that you went through Yom Kippur and didn't do Tshuvah. That enables you to understand how not doing Tshuvah can have a negative effect on last year and push the scales down. Yes?
So let's say you're doing Tshuva, and that the regular process, you ask for forgiveness, and then not from a person, from like Hashem, for whatever you transgressed, you ask for forgiveness, and you vow that you won't do it again. Let's say you do it again.
Okay, so we talked about this the other day. Did I talk to you about this? Temporary Tshuvah and strategic Tshuvah? I think no.
But you don't think or know necessarily you'll do it again, but you end up doing it again, and then like.
Right. So the bottom line is that temporary Tshuvah is valid, because as the Rambam defines it very carefully, Tshuvah requires you to resolve sincerely in your heart not to repeat it. It does not require that you succeed. He specifically avoids saying that you must succeed.
You have to have a real belief that you're never going to do it.
That you're going to not do it again.
Well, I think you have to have a real commitment not to do it again. Beliefs about the future can be verified only through prophecy. No one can really know what's going to happen and how things are going to turn out. So I don't think you have to believe something which you're not really capable of knowing. That would be a little bit like engaging in fantasy.
We nadir, like when we we saying we neither we won't do it again? Because I can't promise I won't sin again, right?
I think that's right. I don't think there's any source which says that it's appropriate to make a neder, a vow, that you're not going to sin again. No, that's not appropriate. But you have to mean it. I don't want to do this. I'm making strategies to try to overcome it. I'm pledging myself to do it. I think it's no different, let's say, from a diet or an exercise routine or other things that people do. And sometimes they succeed and sometimes they don't. When they don't succeed, it doesn't mean they were lying or deceiving themselves when they said they meant it. They did mean it. And then things changed. And in fact, I think this is built into the concept of Tshuvah. Let's think for a second. Tshuvah means I used to do X, Y, Z. I realize it's bad, and I've decided not to continue it, and I regret it, and I confess it, and I change. I really change for the better. Tshuvah presupposes it's possible to really change for the better. Well, if you can really change for the better, then you can really change for the worse also. Both changes are real changes. So if on Yom Kippur, in October, you say, I'm committed not to doing this, and this commitment is sincere, you are now a different person from the person you were 2 days before. And that difference can persist, let's say, until May. And then a real deterioration can take place, where you again change who you are and become worse than you were for those 5 months. That doesn't mean back in October it wasn't a real change. They're both real changes. The real improvement was an improvement, and the real deterioration was a deterioration. And that means that the improvement that you made in Yom Kippur was valid. It really was Tshuvah, and it had the effect that it was supposed to have. And in fact, we say in the weekday Shemona Esrei, Hanun Hamar Belisloah, God who is gracious and forgives, greatly forgives. Marbe means a great quantity. There's a great quantity of forgiveness. Well, that's very vague. And one natural understanding is no matter how bad the transgression is, God will forgive it. That's true. Ein davar omer b'fnei Tshuvah. Nothing stands in the way of Tshuvah. When a person does Tshuvah, he cancels out responsibility for the actions that he performed. And Tosha says the same thing for those who are aficionados of the Rishonim. But Mar Belisloach also means, according to some commentators, that he forgives you over and over again. And he forgives you over and over again for the same transgression. That's what a great multitude of forgiveness. And there's a verse in Proverbs, Sheva yipol tzadik v'kam. The righteous person falls 7 times and gets up. So if you think to be righteous means to be perfect, that's wrong. Righteous people fall. Righteous people make mistakes and do things wrong, but they get up afterwards. The wicked person is the one who falls and he's down for the count. He's out for the count, he's knocked out and he's out of the game. And that means, according to some, that even if you do the same thing over and over again, 7 times falling, each time getting up, and each time being forgiven for that fall, and then falling again and getting up and being forgiven for that fall. So the principle is that temporary Tshuvah is valid Tshuvah. You don't lose your benefits by deteriorating again in the future, and in that way, then you'd be starting a new record, and that new record would have its blemishes on it. Yes.
So you said a second ago that you could be on your deathbed and do Tshuvah and be repent for all the transgressions that you made throughout your life, and you would be absolved of all of them. My experience with Christianity is very limited, so the question requires a grain of salt, but it sounds very similarly to confessing your sins and being absolved of them.
I don't know Christianity well enough to comment as whether it is or not, but let's remember that one element in Tshuvah is regret. So you can't think of this as a really handy tool. Shall I eat this cheeseburger or not? gee, I like the cheeseburger, and then consequences? So I'll do tshuva, I'll get out of it, and therefore I'll have a doubly good life, with cheeseburgers and with the world to come and with no responsibility. That you can't do because you are convincing yourself now of this procedure because you think it's a good procedure. It really works. It gets me the best that I can possibly ask for. And if that's the way you feel about it, you're not going to be able to sincerely regret it later. Because you chose it because you thought it was the optimal procedure. You don't regret a decision like that. You can't be planning to regret it. So the fact that he's got tshuva in his mind and he's maybe putting it off, but still he can't use that as a way to simply continue his life of transgressions and feel that he's getting away with them. That can't be done.
One of the other ways that you said was that not only do you have to have regret, but you have to resolve that you won't do it again. Is that a sincere resolve if you know you're on your deathbed?
Okay, this is a very good question. I didn't go back to the first law in this chapter, in chapter 2, to go through it with you. But let me tell you what he says there, and you'll learn something very deep about this. This is a very important question. In the first law of chapter 2, he asks, what is complete tshuva? We've been talking about tshuva. The tshuva has 3 parts. But in the first law, he says there's something else called complete tshuva, which would imply that this that we've been talking about up until now is incomplete tshuva. That's what it would imply, and that is in fact correct. What is complete tshuva? Complete tshuva means being in the exact same circumstances in which he failed, and this time making the right decision. And making the right decision because of tshuva, not because he's afraid or because of any other private circumstances. No, because he's doing tshuva. Such a person, he says, is called Baal Tshuva Gemura. Baal means you're a master of, you've acquired a certain title, and the title is complete tshuva. Then he says, even if a person lets time go by, and it comes to a period of time where he's not in the same circumstances anymore, where it's not possible to do what he did before in the same way, so forth and so on. If he does tshuva, he's called a Baal Tshuva. Not Gemura, but Baal Tshuva. And then he says, if he's on his deathbed and he does tshuva, he's forgiven and there's atonement for all of his transgressions, but no Baal of anything. He hasn't acquired any title for what he's done. He's simply done an action, but God responds to the action in the same way. So there's definitely a difference in the quality of the performance. Now, what is the dimension on which it gets less and less? Precisely what you said. If the person actually undergoes the same conditions in which he transgressed and now doesn't because he's done tshuva, he's shown that at least at that moment he's immune to the temptation. That's a real psychological revolution. Something that he used to do deliberately, now, when it's right in front of him, he says no. When he said in his tshuva, I'm not going back to it, he really meant it. And you see that by the test. If he waits 30 years and he hasn't got the same strength, the same desires that he had, and so forth and so on, he could still really mean it, but there's much less at stake because doing it isn't available for him anymore. On his deathbed, the statement becomes almost trivial. Yes, God, I promise I will never do it again in the next 2 hours. Because that's all he's got left. It's 2 hours. It's enough anyway. It's enough anyway. And the message here is, when you do everything you can, that's enough. Even if it doesn't live up to the exact letter or spirit of the original conditions, when time passes and your condition changes, and at that new condition you do everything that you can, that's enough. So here, I agree with you, there's a certain almost triviality in saying, I won't do it for 2 hours. But if your heart is sincere, if you could make the judgment, if I was a miraculous cure, and I lived for another 100 years, and I was healthy and strong, I still wouldn't do it. So that's the kind of commitment that you would have to try to make. But it would only be an imaginary commitment. It wouldn't be a real commitment. So there is a difference in the level of performance and the level of credit the person gets for the tshuva under those conditions, but the tshuva works. Okay, let's pick up a little bit more. I'm sorry I was late. The truth is I do therapeutic exercise, and it's a French Hill, and transportation from French Hill to here is very difficult. So I'm trying to find another solution. Okay. The bottom of page 2. Even though the sounding of the shofar of Rosh Hashanah is a decree, it contains an illusion. Now here the Rambam is paraphrasing a statement in the Gemara. Several times in the Gemara asks, why do we do this and this mitzvah? And the answer is, why do we do it? God said to do it. End of story. And then the Gemara goes on to say, yeah, if you're wondering what the authority is behind it and what creates my obligation to do it, yes, God said to do it. That's enough. But what meaning does it have? What message does it have? And not always do we get an answer. Something called chukim typically is very hard to find meanings for it. Maybe only the deepest Kabbalah would have meanings for it. But that's what the Rambam is saying here. You tell me why I'm doing it, what creates my obligation to do it. God said to do it. But there also contains an illusion. It is as if the shofar's call is saying, wake up, you sleepy ones, from your sleep, and you who slumber, arise. Inspect your deeds, repent, do Tshuvah, remember your Creator. Those who forget the truth and the vanities of time, and throughout the entire year, devote their energies to vanity and emptiness, vanity meaning things without meaning, things without any significance, which will not benefit or save. They will not create your character. They will not create your relationship to God. They will not serve you in the infinite, eternal world to come. To such people, the Shofar says, look to your souls. Improve your ways and your deeds. Let every one of you abandon his evil path and thoughts. So, shofar was a means of communication. Shofar, trumpets. Sound, as you very well know, is a much more effective and thorough means of communication than others, because let's say you wave a flag, or you to see a flag, you got to be looking in the right direction, and you can't be behind a wall. Sound, that's why you have sirens. Sirens alert people because it gets to everybody. So the shofar is also a call, and it can be a call to a joyous occasion, or it can be a call that Shabbos is coming and be careful not to transgress Shabbos because the time is waning, or it can be a call to war. The idea is pay attention. It's something you need to pay attention to because something of great consequence is coming to take place. And the Rabbi was saying, listen, you performed the actions you performed, they're on your record. If you don't do something about it, they're not going away. We have times when the Kodesh Baruch Hu judges the world, and the judgment is more active, and so on, but it's always on record. So you've been going through the year, occupying yourself with things of lesser importance. Now is the time to wake up and realize that there are things of crucial importance, that you have liabilities, and you need to take care of them. His call is a call to consciousness. In other words, the facts here are not in question. We know that there are standards by which our actions are judged. We, if we're morally sensitive, judge ourselves by it. Other people judge us by it, and our Creator judges us by it. And that judgment is on standing. When you perform the action, it's part of the record, and it has the character that it has. Well, that's your record. And you're going to live with that record unless you do something about it. If you do Tshuvah, you can change what you live with. But if you don't, you can't. If you don't pay attention, you're going to miss opportunities, and you're going to suffer consequences which you otherwise wouldn't want to suffer. So the shofar is a wake-up call. Now, when you know that, it has a double effect. You know, because if you go to the davening in the morning, that we're blowing shofar now. Why are we blowing shofar now? Shofar is a mitzvah of Rosh Hashanah. Well, this is part answer to what you asked about when to do Tshuvah. You shouldn't wait for Rosh Hashanah to do Tshuvah. Yes, the legal obligation is on Yom Kippur. You could even wait until Yom Kippur to do it, but you shouldn't, because the message of the shofar and the need for Tshuvah is something that applies all year long. So it's as if, this is what I mentioned about complete Tshuvah and incomplete Tshuvah, it's as if saying, you owe someone something. He did something for you and you owe him something in return. And okay, I can do it next month. You can, and he'll recognize it next month. But when you have an obligation that applies to you, a debt that you have to pay, the course of wisdom is to pay it as quickly as possible. Let's be brutal. Do you know for sure you'll be alive next month? Or do you know for sure that you'll have the resources to pay the debt next month? If you know you have the debt and you have the resources to pay it, the course of wisdom is to pay it now, not wait for something to happen. So we are inspired by the anticipation of shofar. It's not as if you walk into the shofar dead asleep, and then suddenly the shofar was, oh, look at that, 1st of Tishrei, didn't see it coming, and then suddenly take it seriously. No, knowing that you're going to blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah means that for weeks beforehand, you're anticipating it, and already the spirit of it is applying to you. And that is why, one of the reasons why we blow shofar early, we ourselves are using the message in the shofar to awaken ourselves before Rosh Hashanah comes. And this has a direct application to the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, because blowing the shofar on Rosh Hashanah is supposed to somehow affect that God should look at us with mercy rather than with strict judgment. A sensitive person will ask, really? You played a tune on a horn, and he changes the way he judges you. That's childish. That's primitive, So why did you play the tune on a horn? Why is that should make any difference? So Ramchal in the Derech Hashem, where he describes this, he adds 2 words. Ima Tshuvah. Blowing the shofar is only going to have that effect if you have done Tshuvah. If you have done Tshuvah already. Why do I say already? Because one element of Tshuvah, as we have mentioned, is confession, and you don't confess on Rosh Hashanah. Almost no one confesses on Rosh Hashanah. How am I going to stand there on Rosh Hashanah with the shofar, with Tshuvah, if I can't confess on Rosh Hashanah? The answer is I must have done it before. And that's one of the reasons why, if you're lucky enough to be a Sephardi, you have slichos, penitential prayers for the whole month of Elul. And if you are a second-hand Ashkenazi, you have it 4 days before Rosh Hashanah, but you have it before Rosh Hashanah. And in the slichos, you confess the sins that you've done, and you do Tshuvah for them. So you walk into Rosh Hashanah with the Tshuvah already done. And then when we talk about Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur as a search for Tshuvah, the 10 days of Tshuvah, it means the 10 days that you're in a state of Tshuvah. Not the 10 days that you're doing Tshuvah, but that you've done it from before. So this again is how Rosh Hashanah projects backwards and gives us an inspiration. When the Rambam talks about the illusion of the shofar, it's not just what's going to happen on Rosh Hashanah. It's what we anticipate and starts to give us that inspiration even before that time. Okay, so you have a Chazor at 5:30, so I'll quit now. Sorry, no. And I will see you in Yeshivat Hashem tomorrow.